Hi guys, Olive here. Here today with my summer book haul. I've been going to a lot of library book sales and used bookstores lately. I've been doing some traveling, especially in the previous 2 months when I was taking it a little bit easier here on my channel. I got to travel to some new places and visit some bookstores while I was there. I was very lucky in that regard. And as you can imagine, doing all of those things has resulted in a lot of new/used books coming into my life lately. So I set aside all the ones that reminded me of the summer season, since it is now officially summertime, and I thought I would show them to you in today's book haul. There are a lot of books to get through in this haul. I think this is one of the biggest hauls I've ever done, if not the biggest haul I've ever done. So there's no time to waste. Let's get started. I wanted to start off by showing you all the books that I got that are either about the ocean or are related in some way to the ocean. So the first book I have to show you is called The Ocean at Home, an illustrated history of the aquarium by Bernd Brunner, which is of course a history of humans keeping miniature ocean worlds indoors, and what exactly has compelled us to do so over the centuries. Next is The Wave by Susan Casey, in which the author talks about how she traveled the world hunting down stories of monstrous, terrifying waves from people who actually seek them out. But now a book about what lies beneath those waves. This is Worlds in Shadow, Submerged Lands in Science, Memory, and Myth by Patrick Nunn. This book presents facts and also fictional stories about submerged lands, including Atlantis, of course, but he also has a discussion about what might be in store for us given climate change. Another book about the mystery of the sea is The Search for the Giant Squid, the biology and mythology of the world's most elusive sea creature by Richard Ellis. We now know that the giant squid does in fact exist, but for centuries it was a creature of myth because no one knew if it actually existed or not. It's that elusive and hard to find, and because of that, it remains a highly understudied creature even today. So in this book, the author talks about what we do know about the biology of the giant squid, but he also discusses it in the context of history and literature. But maybe it's not so hard to find the giant squid after all, because I found it on the cover of this next book. It's called Treasury of Folklore, Seas and Rivers by D.D. Cheney and Willow Winsham. See, there it is right there, getting ready to devour that ship. As you can see, this is a gorgeous naked hardback that is actually a collection of tales about seas and rivers from around the globe, and it's also now probably one of the most beautiful books I own. And speaking of rivers, I also got Rivertown, 2 Years on the Yangtze by Peter Hessler, which is a journalist's account of 2 years he spent in a remote Chinese village while he was in the Peace Corps. But now I have a couple of books about rowing that I would like to share with you, starting with Canoeing with Cree by Eric Severeid. This book tells the story of 2 teenagers who in 1930 rowed from Minneapolis, Minnesota, the whole way up to Canada's Hudson Bay. And this is now kind of a classic work of nonfiction. Their route is pretty famous within rowing circles. And I know this because last year for the Christian Science Monitor, I reviewed a memoir of a pair of women who recreated this trip. So when I saw this classic book in my used bookstore, I knew I had to have it. But the other book that I got that involves rowing is called Northland, a 4,000-mile journey along America's forgotten border by Porter Fox. In this book, the travel writer-author chronicles the 3 years he spent exploring the border between the United States and Canada. But that book moves me into discussing all the books that I picked up that are about specific places. And the first of those that I want to show you is Florida by Lauren Groff. This is a short story collection from the famous author of Matrix and Fates and Furies. And this collection has America's strangest state at its center. And that's not just me who thinks that. I feel like it is common knowledge that Florida is a very wild place within the United States of America, and my proof of that is this next book. It's called A Florida State of Mind, An Unnatural History of Our Weirdest State by James D. Wright. This is both a history of the state and its many contradictions, but this is also a discussion about why people seem to love Florida and hate Florida all at the same time. And believe it or not, I have one more book about Florida to show you in this haul. This one is called The Swamp, The Everglades, Florida, and the Politics of Paradise by Michael Grunwald. This book is the story of how people tried and failed to tame the Everglades. I know I said I was showing you books about places, but I feel like I have to show you this next one after that previous book, because if we're talking swamps, then we're talking mosquitoes. And this next book is called The Mosquito, A Human History of Our Deadliest Predator by Michael C. Weingard. This is a work of narrative nonfiction, and it is all about the massive impact that these blood-sucking insects have had on human history. But now let's move back into all those books about places, like I promised you. This next one is a book about the American South, and it is called Noodling for Flatheads: Moonshine, Monster Catfish, and Other Southern Comforts by Burkhard Bilger. That is quite the name. This is a collection of essays all about unconventional Southern hobbies and pastimes. Before we move more firmly in the direction of travel writing within this book haul, I did want to briefly interject once again and show you this next book. It's called A Crack in the Edge of the World: America and the Great California Earthquake of 1906 by Simon Winchester. This is a history of that devastating 20th century earthquake that registered an 8.25 on the Richter scale. Not only do I want to learn more about that earthquake, but also this dust jacket actually unfolds. I've never seen anything like this before. How cool is that? But like I said before, I now want to show you all the travel books that I picked up. And this first pair actually has an interesting story, because at one library book sale, I found this Harper Perennial paperback edition of Bill Bryson's The Lost Continent: Travels Through Small Town America, in which he attempted to find America's perfect small town. I found this at one library book sale, and then at a completely different book sale, I found another one of those paperback editions. This one is Neither Here Nor There, Travels Through Europe, in which he goes back to Europe, attempting to recreate a backpacking trip he took in the 70s. Finding both of these at different sales, but basically looking like they're twins, it just felt meant to be. The next book I have to show you is very specifically about summer travel. It is called Wild Horses of the Summer Sun, a memoir of Iceland by Tori Bilski. And in this book, the author discusses how she, along with a group of women, traveled to Iceland several summers in a row in order to be able to ride the Icelandic horses. And since we're on the topic of horses, I also picked up The $80 Champion: Snowman, the Horse That Inspired a Nation by Elizabeth Letts. This book tells the story of a Cold War-era racehorse who became an unlikely champion. And I feel like a few things were pointing me in this book's direction. First and foremost, I read and reviewed this author's most recent book for the Christian Science Monitor last year, and very recently I read and reviewed an entirely different book about racehorses for the Monitor, so it felt like I should pick this up. Next up is The Storied City: The Quest for Timbuktu and the Fantastic Mission to Save Its Past by Charlie English. This book is, of course, a look at the African city of Timbuktu, but it's my understanding that this book tells two main stories. The first one is about the Western exploration of the city, but the other story is about this rescue mission that librarians within the city undertook to save ancient manuscripts that were under threat. But now back to books relating to the ocean, I also got Dark Salt Clear: The Life of a Fishing Town by Lamorna Ash. This is the author's memoir in which she discusses what it was like growing up in Britain's largest working fishing ports. This one has been on my radar since it was shortlisted for the Wainwright Prize for Nature Writing back in 2020. Then I have a couple of books about lighthouses. This first one is called Brilliant Beacons: A History of the American Lighthouse by Eric J. Dolan. And this book traces the evolution of America's lighthouse system from its earliest days. I have to admit before I show you this next lighthouse book that calling it a lighthouse book is probably a little bit of a generous definition. You'll see what I mean when I show it to you. This book is called All the Lives We Ever Lived, Seeking Solace in Virginia Woolf by Catherine Smith. This book is a memoir in which the author discusses her connection to Virginia Woolf's novel, To the Lighthouse. Now you see why I called it a lighthouse book. It seems like this book is going to share some similarities with books like My Life in Middlemarch by Rebecca Mead. I love those types of books, so I can't wait to read this one. The next book I have to show you is another work of nonfiction focused on a female author. This book is called Wrapped in Rainbows, The Life of Zora Neale Hurston by Valerie Boyd. This is very obviously a biography of the author Zora Neale Hurston, who I have been dying to learn more about ever since I read and fell in love with Their Eyes Were Watching God. That was my favorite novel of last year. But I don't just want to learn more about Zora Neale Hurston's life, I also want to read more of her work, which is why I picked up Moses, Man of the Mountain, which is Hurston's take on the tale of Moses. Next I got A Summer of Hummingbirds, Love, Art, and Scandal in the Intersecting Worlds of Emily Dickinson, Mark Twain, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Martin Johnson Heed by Christopher Benfey. This book is a look at how the lives of these four people intersected in post-Civil War era America, and apparently there's a lot of hummingbird imagery in here, which is definitely intriguing to me since I just reviewed 2 books on hummingbirds last year. The next summary read that I picked up is a classic that you most definitely have heard of. It is Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. This book was on my classics TBR for this year, but in that video I asked for recommendations of what translation I should pick up since I didn't have my own copy yet, and overwhelmingly you all recommended the Edith Grossman translation. So that's the one I picked up. And I also got a recommendation to save this book for the summer months because it so perfectly suits the summer months. So I've got my copy and I'm ready to read it this summer. And since I'm going to be reading Don Quixote here in the next couple of months, I also picked up a couple of nonfiction books centered around the novel. This first one is simply titled Quixote, The Novel and the World by Elon Stevens. And this book is all about the cultural impact that Don Quixote, the novel, has had on the world. And the other one is called Don Quixote's Delusions, Travels in Castilian Spain by Miranda France. This is the author's memoir in which she discusses 2 different journeys. There is first her physical journey of traveling to and around Spain, but then there's also an inner journey, and by that I mean she's studying Cervantes and Don Quixote, and she's also making a lot of observations about post-Franco Spain. Now, this next book, I wouldn't strictly consider this a summary book. I don't think it's necessarily reminiscent of the summertime, but it does remind me of this season. More specifically, it reminds me of the month of June, because this book is Gotham Rising, New York City in the 1930s by Jules Stewart. This book does exactly what the subtitle says. It's a history of New York in the 1930s. And the reason why I associate this book with this month of the year is that I reread my favorite book of all time, Rules of Civility by Amor Towles, every single June. And wouldn't you know it, Amor Towles himself wrote the foreword to this book. Then I got a couple of sports books, the first one being The Mysterious Montague, a true tale of Hollywood, golf, and armed robbery by Lee Montville. This is a biography of the enigmatic golf star John Montague, written by legendary sports writer Lee Montville, who just so happened to write one of my favorite nonfiction books of last year. So I definitely want to read more of his stuff. And the other sports book I have to show you was actually one of my most anticipated releases of last year. It's called Crossing the Line, A Fearless Team of Brothers and the Sport That Changed Their Lives Forever by Kareem Rosser. This book is about 2 brothers who first fell in love with horseback riding and then fell in love with playing polo. I have been dying to read this one. The last nonfiction book in this haul is called Finders Keepers, A Tale of Archaeological Plunder and Obsession by Craig Childs. This book is all about the ethics of archaeology, which is a subject that has really interested me ever since I read The Dinosaur Artist by Paige Williams. I'm going to be closing out this haul with the 2 fiction books I have left to show you. This first one is called Dreamers of the Day by Mary Doria Russell. Tale. In this book, we follow a 40-something-year-old school teacher who travels to Egypt in 1921 and finds herself in the company of some very famous figures. I have not heard a ton about this book, but I love Mary Doria Russell, so I am excited to read it. And the last book I have to show you in this haul is a novel that I was so excited about that I ordered it brand new off of Book Depository, which I don't do very much. I mainly stick to used books. But this one seemed so up my alley, it is not even funny. This book is called The Fair Botanist by Sarah Sheridan. This book is set in Edinburgh in 1822, and it stars Lady Botanist. And ever since, I read and fell in love with The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert. Historical fiction, starring Lady Botanist. Yeah, that's something I have all the time in the world for. So those were all of the summer feeling books I've picked up recently. All of them will be linked in the description box below for your clicking convenience. I would love to hear from you if any of these caught your interest, if they've made their way onto your TBR, or if you've read any of these, you'd like to share your thoughts on them, or if you have opinions on where I should start with this gigantic pile of books. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. And if you would like to keep up with what I am reading and writing about right now, you can find me on a variety of places around the internet, including Goodreads and Instagram, the two places where I'm the most active. The links to everywhere you can find me will be at the bottom of the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.